She would walk if it killed her. Betty pulled Elysande's arm over her shoulders and helped her shuffle out of the cell. It was a slow, laborious effort, but once she had her out of the cell, Betty urged her to grasp the smooth bars to help her stay upright, then rushed to the end of the small hall and snatched up a bag by the wall. Elysande frowned slightly, but didn't ask questions. She merely watched her pull a gown from the bag and quickly begin to stuff it with the fetid straw that covered the hall floor. The maid filled the bag itself last and then hurried into the cell and arranged her creation under the ratty blanket. Only when Betty straightened to examine her handiwork did Elysande understand what she was doing. She'd managed to make it look like a huddled figure curled against the back wall of the cell. Like she was still there, Elysande realized, as the maid rushed back and closed the cell door. They both stiffened and glanced warily to the guard when the action set up another protesting squeal. But the man remained asleep. Elysande released a relieved breath and drew in another, only to hold that one, when Betty moved cautiously over to the man to set the keys carefully on the table in front of him, where she'd apparently got them. Despite the maid's caution, they made the faintest clanking noises as she set them down. Still, the man didn't stir. Releasing a shaky little sigh, Betty moved quickly back to her side and took her arm over her shoulders again. "This way," she whispered, and led her to the end of the hall where the bag had been. "Mother?" Elysande asked in a soft voice, when the girl pushed and turned the correct stone to open the secret passage. She told me how to open it," Betty admitted. It wasn't what Elysande had been asking. She wanted to know how her mother was, but as the wall swung open to reveal what seemed like 1,000,000 stairs stretching upward, she decided that her mother must be all right to have given the girl directions. So she saved her breath and moved into the hidden passage. Hewn into the stone and disappearing up into darkness, the stairs were too narrow for them to move side by side. Betty couldn't help her here. She would have to manage them on her own. And she would, Elysande told herself firmly, even if she had to drag herself up them on her belly. And she very nearly did. Elysande was on her hands and knees by the time they reached the top of the stairwell. Gasping with relief as she made it off the last step, Elysande collapsed to the cold stone passage, every muscle in her body trembling with exhaustion. "Milady." Elysande sighed at that whisper from Betty. She wanted to just lie there and die, but she couldn't. Her mother. The brush of cool cloth across her arm and cheek made her open her eyes. She couldn't see in this Stygian darkness, but guessed that Betty was stepping carefully over her to stand by her head in the narrow passage, and it was the maid's skirts she'd felt. "Milady, it isn't much farther now." The girl's whisper was accompanied by her hands clasping Elysande's shoulders. The maid was going to try to help her to her feet. Ignoring her aches and pains, Elysande ground her teeth together and pushed herself up onto her knees. She then braced one hand against the stone wall, grabbed the girl's arm with the other, and managed to drag herself to her feet. "Are you all right?" Betty whispered with concern. "I am fine," Elysande said, panting, and then took a deep breath to steady herself. "Let us go. I would see Mother." She sensed, rather than saw, the girl move away. Elysande took another deep breath and then braced her hands against the cool stone walls on either side of her and shuffled forward, following. She didn't realize how far behind she'd fallen until Betty opened the secret entrance to her mother's room and light spilled into the passage from a good 10 feet ahead. Straightening her shoulders, Elysande tried to move more quickly. It still seemed like forever before she reached the opening, and then she was blinded by the light in the room. There were only 2 small candles there to chase away the night's gloom, but after her time in the dark dungeon, those candles were like staring directly into the sun. Elysande had to close her eyes to protect them. Fortunately, Betty recognized the problem at once and took her arm to lead her across the room to her mother's bed. Much to her relief, Elysande had adjusted enough by then that she could at least see, though she was still squinting against the light when she dropped to her knees next to the bed.